In the summer heat of 1260, when the world trembled before the unstoppable storm of the Mongol Empire, a moment arrived that no one in the known world expected. Moment when the earth cracked, history twisted, and an empire that had swallowed nations suddenly tasted fear. For decades, the Mongols had been a force of nature. They had burned cities, crushed kingdoms, and left entire civilizations in smoke. Baghdad had fallen, Persia lay shattered, Syria staggered, and the spirit of the Middle East seemed broken forever. To people living at that time, the Mongols looked less like men and more like an omen, a divine punishment sweeping across continents. And yet, in this darkest hour, a small, struggling power, one that wasn't even fully united, stood in their path. The Mamluks of Egypt, former slaves turned warriors, men forged in pain and trained in discipline so brutal that it made them the deadliest cavalry of their age. They were not kings by birth, not princes by blood, but warriors who rose from chains to command nations. And leading them was a man whose life itself felt like a story destiny had written: Sultan Qutuz. Qutuz knew exactly what the Mongols were. He had seen the destruction with his own eyes, heard the stories of cities turned into mass graves, seen populations wiped out in days. When Hulagu Khan, brother of the great Khan, sent a message to Qutuz, an ultimatum dripping with arrogance, everyone around the Sultan froze. The letter was simple: surrender, kneel, or burn like the others. Qutuz paused for a long moment, a silence so cold that it made even his generals uneasy. And then he did something that no ruler had dared to do after the fall of Baghdad. He ordered the Mongol envoys to be executed. Their heads were hung on the gates of Cairo. That single act announced something the world thought was impossible. The Mongol terror had finally met someone not afraid to fight back. But the Mongols were already marching. Hulagu Khan had pulled back most of his forces to Mongolia after the death of the great Khan, but the army he left behind was still monstrous, led by one of the most feared commanders in Mongol history, Kitbuqa, a master of siege, destruction, and psychological warfare. Kitbuqa rode south with confidence. In his mind, Egypt was just another city to burn. The Mamluks prepared for a war they were told they could not win. Qutuz gathered every warrior, every archer, every rider capable of holding a blade. And beside him stood the young, brilliant commander, Baybars, a general whose tactical genius would shape the battlefield in ways the Mongols never expected. As both armies marched toward Palestine, the air felt heavy, as though the sky itself understood that the fate of continents rested in this clash. The world was about to witness the battle that would decide whether Mongol horses would drink from the Nile or whether the empire would finally be stopped. The place chosen for this confrontation was Ain Jalut, the spring of Goliath, a valley surrounded by rolling hills, sharp terrain, and narrow passages. A perfect location not for open combat but for ambush, and that's exactly what Baybars wanted. Dawn broke on September 3rd, 1260. Kitbuqa's forces poured into the valley like a tide of iron and dust. Mongol drums thundered, their war cries slicing through the morning air. They expected the Mamluks to break within minutes, like everyone else before them. Baybars rode ahead with the vanguard, striking fast, firing arrows, taunting the Mongols, and then retreating, drawing them deeper and deeper into the valley. Kitbuqa believed the Mamluks were scared, running for their lives. It was exactly what Baybars wanted him to think. And the Mongol commander took the bait. He ordered a full charge. The valley shook under the pounding of hooves. Dust spiraled into the air. Arrows darkened the sky. The Mongols roared forward, but they didn't know that hundreds of Mamluk soldiers were hidden behind the ridges, waiting silently for the signal. Suddenly the Mamluks turned. Baybars shouted the command, and their cavalry spun around with perfect formation. The trap slammed shut. Qutuz, watching from a distance, saw the crisis point, the moment every battle has when victory can break apart in seconds. And instead of staying behind like a king, he ripped off his helmet, raised his sword, and charged into battle himself, screaming, "Wah! Islam!" The cry echoed through the valley like thunder. The Mamluks surged with him, crashing into the Mongol flank, pushing them into chaos. Kitbuqa fought fiercely, killing soldiers around him, refusing to retreat. He was a warrior to the last breath, but even he could not escape the storm now surrounding him. The Mamluks cut down the Mongol ranks piece by piece, breaking the formation, isolating the general, and overwhelming what remained. By midday, the Mongols were collapsing. By afternoon, they were finished. Kitbuqa was captured and executed. The desert wind carried away the dust of battle, and Ain Jalut stood silent again. But in that silence, history had already changed. This was the first major Mongol defeat in open battle. It shattered the myth of Mongol invincibility. It halted their expansion into North Africa. It saved Egypt, saved the Arabian Peninsula, saved Mecca and Andina from destruction, and saved Europe from a westward Mongol push across the Mediterranean. But more than all that, it proved something deeper: no empire, no matter how terrifying, is unstoppable forever. The victory turned the Mamluks into the dominant Muslim power of the region. Baybars would later become one of the greatest sultans in history, and Ain Jalut became a symbol for every generation after that. Courage, strategy, and unity can break even the strongest storm. When people today talk about the battles that changed the world, this one stands right at the top. Because on that day in 1260, when two worlds collided in a dusty valley in Palestine, the Mongol tornado that had torn through continents was finally stopped. And humanity, for the first time in decades, could breathe again.